Well, hey, gang from all over. We are thrilled that you have joined us today for the Thrive Summit. What a great morning. And then we got breakouts going here all over the map. You'll get to experience this one, but you also get to jump into other ones thanks to Thrive's generosity. That those are going to be available the next few days as well. As we continue here, we just want to give you a quick lay of the land. If you look at the top right corner, you probably know this already as a Zoom user, but it says speaker view. Sometimes that makes it a little bit easier to engage if you click that button. So feel free to do that. And I want to honor the folks at Thrive for the buzzword these days is pivot, isn't it? And Thrive has done an incredible job pivoting from being able, not being able to host an in-person gathering to hosting this incredible worldwide online gathering, still offering dozens of breakouts, actually engaging more speakers than they were even planning on engaging before. I think it just is a real, I just need to do a real shout out to the Thrive team. I know some of the folks there and have just called them up and brought them encouragement and learned from them. Also want to honor you. Thank you for your courage in engaging an environment like this, an online environment, rather than it'd be easy to say, you know what, I can't go in person, I'm not going to engage. But you're choosing to say, hey, through this environment, this is how I get better as a leader. And so I'm going to jump in regardless of the platform and I'm going to engage. So we honor you for being able to do that, for choosing to do that. So thanks for investing in yourself. It's a gift to everyone that you lead, your investment in yourself through the Thrive Summit. So we're excited about what you'll learn and what God is able to bring to us. I get the honor of traveling around the United States, interacting with leaders at some really great organizations. I work for the Global Leadership Network, which is the organization behind the annual Global Leadership Summit. The summit is broadcast to about 1,300 cities all over the world for the last 25 years. We've enjoyed the Global Leadership Summit. So when I sit down with leaders, they're already predisposed to an interest in leadership development, simply because I'm meeting with them because of their interest in the Global Leadership Summit. So they understand the idea of the leader, the law of the lid, right? That the leader's team is only able to get as far as the leader has gone. So if I get better as a leader, I can draw even more sharp people. Oftentimes, when I'm in conversations with leaders, I'll ask the question, tell me about how you are going about developing new leaders. And the answer, quite frankly, is almost always the same. They look at me like I have three heads. They have no, what do you mean? How do I developing leaders? I don't even know what that means. I can barely hold things together for tomorrow or this coming weekend. How do I think about developing leaders? Sometimes they'll pull themselves together and start talking about things that they've tried, but oftentimes the pain points of a lack of leadership development emerge very quickly. That there's just not that many, there's not enough leaders, or we have a leader who is perhaps looked really great up front, but then maybe it turns out that they need more work than we thought that they did, or weren't as far as we thought. Or we have a launch date for a new initiative that is looming and we just don't have enough leaders to be able to lead what it is that we are looking to launch. So that often births frustration. And sometimes leaders will say, hey, why don't we read a book together? And then they'll start the book, but then a busy season will come around and they get away from the book. And the best laid intentions often just kind of wither out, or kind of they just don't catch the momentum that they need to catch, and therefore that takes us back to square one, where we just don't have enough leaders. So given that reality is the same so frequently, we start to ask a series of questions when we investigate this trying to tackle leadership development. And one of those questions is, why won't leadership development gain traction? Why can't we get this leadership development thing to continue? Why does it always lose steam? Inconsistent at best. We'd love to invite you to, as we're engaged here, we'd love to toss you toward the chat a couple of times through our time together. And this is one of those opportunities. Why is it the case that leadership development seems to lose energy? I'm going to invite you to hit at the very bottom of your Zoom screen there. It says chat. Just click the chat button and you can start to actually type in, why do you think that's the case in your neck of the woods? Why do you think that's the case in your world, that leadership development seems to lose energy? Is it tyranny of the urgent? Is, what are those possible reasons? You can just toss those into the chat as we move along. And here's what we know. We know that this actually isn't the case for everybody that's on the call, right? This is for all those other leaders because your leadership development efforts are working great. The natural response to desiring to see more leaders is to start asking a series of questions. What are the skills that we need to include in the leadership development track? What content should we use in leadership development? How often should leadership development occur? What's the right length of time for a leadership development gathering? What's the frequency? Is it weekly, monthly, quarterly? How does that work? We start to ask a series of questions. These are all great questions, but they're not actually the first questions that we need to ask. The first questions that we need to ask have to do with the culture, the environment. Do we have a leadership culture? Because regardless of the seeds that we might plant into the soil of our culture, if that soil isn't filled with life-giving nutrients, whatever it is that we plant and come up with from a leadership development effort is going to wither away. So it's really important to curate a great leadership culture. Now, how do we go about doing that? I'm going to invite us to take a look at some scripture that was a game changer in my mind when it comes to leadership culture. So I'm going to share this passage of scripture with you, and we'll refer to it a few times as we go through our time together. Psalm 78, 70 to 72, and it says this: He chose David, his servant, and took him from the sheep pens. From tending the sheep, he brought him to be the shepherd of his people, Jacob, of Israel, his inheritance. And David shepherded them with integrity of heart, and with skillful hands, he led them. And there's multiple spots within just these 3 verses that do an enormous amount of equipping when it comes to leadership development culture. The one that I want to point to first is in Psalm 72, because specifically when it comes to churches especially, leadership development and discipleship often get clouded. When we think about discipleship, sometimes we think about graduate level discipleship being leadership development. And we're actually looking at honing a skill of leadership. In this verse here, it talks about, and David shepherded them with integrity of heart. If I think about where integrity of heart originates, it originates by the Holy Spirit's work within our lives. That's discipleship. As I grow in spiritual maturity, my heart is filled with integrity. So on one hand, David shepherded them with integrity of heart. That was as a result of David's spiritual growth or discipleship. Oftentimes in churches, we have some specific discipleship track that's happening that we can offer to folks. But look at this next part of this verse. And with skillful hands, he led them. So he's got the integrity of heart that comes from discipleship. The leadership skill, though, is something different. It's got to be rooted in discipleship, right? When we anchor our hearts in discipleship, then our leadership skill is steady toward kingdom building efforts. So you've got to have both. Here's what I want us to invite us to consider is look at it as a railroad track. You've got to have 2 rails in order for the train to flow on the railroad track, right? And I want us to look at this railroad track and see one of these rails is discipleship. The other one is leadership development. And together they make the train track of leadership. You have to have both. So when you think about discipleship and spiritual growth, you think about that discipleship pathway that you have within your ministry and context. But then you think about leadership skill as a different rail altogether. Still part of the same track. We've got to anchor our leadership development efforts in discipleship, but let discipleship be discipleship. And let leadership development bring in the skill that Psalm 78:72 is talking about. Skillful hands, he led them. So from that perspective, it's important for us to start by saying, what is our definition of who is a leader? That's actually the first thing that we can look at when we think about actions that fuel leadership culture, is to define who is a leader. Now, we can get pretty hung up on this pretty quickly and have a pretty long conversation with our team that describes really Jesus at the end of the day, right? We can get really perfect and have all kinds of characteristics when it comes to potential leaders. We can go with really broad definitions. I love what Kong just typed into the chat. Leaders are influencers. That is so right. At the end of the day, leadership is influence. So we could leave the definition at that. But the important thing is for you and your team to wrestle this to the ground. How do we go about defining a leader in your context? Who is a leader? It could be characteristics that make a leader, but I want to invite you to think of it in terms of maybe an organizational role. At the end of the day, we can see every Christ follower as a leader because we all are influencing people toward Jesus and toward building the kingdom. When it comes to actually leading a team and the skills that are part of leading a team, that may nuance things a little bit different. So a lot of the teams that I've worked with to help bring about a definition of leadership, one of the things that's been helpful to them is to think in terms of there's a leader from a standpoint of influencing others, and then there's a leader in terms of leading within the context of an organization or leading within the context of the church. We need leaders that can go about leading ministries within the church. So how would we define them? How do we know who our leaders are within our church? Are the leaders the people that help me find my seat or my parking spot when I come onto the campus? Are the leaders the people that are small group leaders or are checking my kids in when I take them to the worship service? Or are the leaders the people that are putting the teams together that look after all of those elements? Think through and reflect. Who is it that's a leader within your context? This is the bedrock and foundation of leadership culture, and getting this so that it is broadly understood and known within your entire organization is mission critical. Because if I have a different definition of leader than my colleague that is also leading within my context, then we're actually going to be developing two different end games. Really important to be crystal clear on defining who is a leader within your context. I'll toss out one example from a church that a few churches that I'm working with actually have some version of this. Leaders recruit, equip, and release people to do the work of the church. So these are folks that are actually going to find team members, they're going to equip them, and then they're going to release them towards some specific aspect of work within the church setting. That might be the formation of one possible definition, but looking specifically, define who is a leader within your context, and does everybody know it? So I'll leave you with 5 questions as we go through this together. And one of those questions is, what is your church's definition of a leader? What is your church's definition of a leader? That's something to reflect on in the future. Okay, let's go back to our passage, shall we? It says in Psalm 78, verse 70, he chose David, his servant, and took him from the sheep pens. So interestingly enough, David, he was found within the sheep pens, right? He wasn't found as a co-leader of something else. He wasn't found as an organizational leader somewhere else that was brought into the mix here. No, he was found within the sheep pens. So when we think about that, each of us within our church setting has a whole bunch of potential people within the sheep pens. These are the people that maybe come to our church and are a part of the church, but they're not yet leaders. So maybe they're engaged in the weekend worship service. Maybe they're engaged in small groups. The sheep pens can have a whole bunch of different definitions, but thinking through, we've got an abundance of people to actually look at and identify potential for leadership. So we think through, okay, I see all these folks within the sheep pens. How do I know who to approach to kind of tap on the shoulder and invite into a potential leadership journey? Well, this is where we go and we look and we say, okay, we need to identify leadership potential. We need to look and say, where is it that I can look into the sheep pens and have some characteristics in mind that kind of help to stand folks out as potential leaders that I might tap and invite into a leadership journey. Now, when you do this, just like with the definition, it's got to be really consistent commitment across your entire team that is going about recruiting leaders. Leaders carry a disproportionate influence in curating the DNA and the culture of your organization. Because of that disproportionate influence, it's critical that the people that you identify are actually embodying the DNA of the organization, the church that you are going about building. So, for example, so often I've seen in my years as a pastor, somebody will come to our church and they'll share, hey, at my last church, this is what I led. I need to do that tomorrow, even though today's my first day. And it's really, really tempting to look and to say, we would love to deploy you immediately because you're a high capacity individual and I can see that. But what'll happen is they'll bring with them the DNA from whatever context that they were serving in as a leader prior. They'll bring that into the organization now as a leader. So we actually want to assimilate them to understand the culture of the organization before we invite them into a leadership role. So that may be some of the characteristics that you actually start to list out when you identify leadership potential. What specifically is it that makes up the expression of who you are as a unique church? There are some universal characteristics to the universal church, but what makes you uniquely different? Tapping people from the sheep pens to join your leadership cohort, your leadership team, it's important to have them actually reflect the DNA that you have within your church or within your organization. So actually list that out. So who embodies your organizational values, who lives out what's important to your organization. And then you can also look at who is it that other people respond to. Let's pause for a little exercise here, because this may actually help you to think through specific names. And these are some exercises that you can do with your teams to help generate names of individuals that we might consider for vetting through and becoming leaders within our organization. Here's the exercise. What if somebody just said, okay, you're no longer here in this particular role. Who is it that fills your job? You've heard that exercise before. So if I were to depart the role that I'm in now, who is it that is next most ready to take my leadership seat? Another organization uses this exercise. They call it 50-yard line hiring. So often when we lose a leader within, whether they be paid or volunteer, whatever, it doesn't matter. We lose a leader, we look and we just say, oh man, now I'm back to the 0-yard line and I got to drive the ball all the way to the goal line. I don't know who to get. Well, what if we could start that game at the 50-yard line and we're halfway there because we constantly are curating 3 potential candidates for every leadership position within our organization. That's 50-yard line hiring. I'm not talking about these are the people that we would instantly hire into or invite into a specific role. These are just potential conversations that we might have, people that we might enter into a conversation with when we have some kind of a leadership need. So we've got a definition, and then we've got a list of characteristics where we can identify the leadership potential so that we know as we're looking at the sheet pens, who is it that is next most ready to consider a leadership journey? Now, before we actually tap them on the shoulder, we need a specific role to invite them into. So the next ingredient to a leadership culture is to clarify our leadership roles. This is actually where capacity building within organizational development happens. Because if I can add more leaders within our organization, I've just increased capacity. My guess is that you get told on a regular basis by the people that you lead with, I need more leaders. And if you ask them, well, what is it that you need the leaders to go about? What do you need them to be responsible for? The response that you'll probably get is actually that they need some doers. And there's a big difference between a doer and a leader. And it's important to clarify the roles so that we actually know what it is that we're inviting leaders into. What's the responsibility that we're entrusting you to? See, we all have to have doers on our team. This isn't about, hey, leaders get gold stars and doers get another less valuable star. No, we're all gold stars here. But somebody needs to convene the doers and orient them toward the responsibilities that we're trying to accomplish. So we're just clarifying the role. We're saying, okay, who are the doers and who are the leaders? And what is it that we're expecting from the leaders? I'll give you a couple of thoughts to help clarify this a little bit as you work with your teams. You can ask your teams this. If you were handed a leader today, what would you entrust them with? If somebody met the qualifications of leadership within your area, they bleed your DNA, what would you have them be responsible for? I'm actually going to invite you to pop that into the chat. For you personally, if you were handed a leader today, what would you entrust them with? What responsibility would you rest on their shoulders? Drop that into the chat just to kind of stimulate our thinking and stimulate our minds. So often when we're working with our teams and we say, hey, would you, when we talk to them about building capacity, we want them to actually see an additional thing that they're adding to the organization. That's what a leader is going to bring. You maybe have heard of the idea of ministry fractals. I'm going to share with you this just briefly here and see if we can understand it. Then a ministry fractal is this. If I've got my ministry here, I'm going to divide it into 4 sections. And here we go. There's a leader for each one of these sections, right? Each one of these 4 areas. Maybe it's worship, small group, children's, and students. And those are the 4 basic areas of the church that we're a part of and a church that we're leading. When it comes to actually adding organizational capacity, the ministry fractal model says this. It says, I'm going to take one of these areas and I'm going to actually move it into an additional 4 areas. And I'm going to actually have an additional set of 4 leaders that I'm going to add into this organization. So we've gone from 4 leaders to 8 leaders, but we're still focusing that on this one area of ministry. But if we fractal out each one of these areas, we can continue to add capacity to the organization. So for example, let's say that this might have been the children's ministry, right? And then we're going to fractal out from the children's ministry. We're going to fractal out this number 2 section and say, okay, that's going to be the elementary ministry. And so I'm going to have maybe, I'm going to have kindergarten 1, I'm going to have 2 and 3, and you break it up by grades. And there's a leader that looks after each one of those areas of ministry. You can continue to break this out. Hey, within the 1st and 2nd grade area, we actually have maybe 4 worship services within our church. And each one of these 1st and 2nd grade areas is going to have a leader within that separate worship service. This is called ministry fractaling. It's a way to add capacity within your organization because you're actually identifying a specific role that a leader can bring, a specific responsibility and contribution. And if you've caught the definition of a leader as somebody who actually goes about recruiting others and releasing them for some kind of a ministry responsibility, you're adding capacity. So this is where the flywheel really kicks in. So you've identified possible leaders. You've got a specific role to have them consider. Now you're ready to make an invitation. Back to our passage. Psalm 78 says he chose David. David didn't take a class. He didn't check a box. He didn't respond to a weekend announcement. He was chosen. See, when we think about choosing people for leadership, it's an incredibly personal opportunity. We're stewarding a spiritual growth opportunity simply with the invitation itself. So when we take we've identified who is it that maybe is next most ready within the sheep pens. We've got our identifiers and we've got our specific role that we will invite people to. Now we can actually make that invitation. Let me share with you a mistake that you probably haven't made, but I've made on many occasions. I remember the very first small group that I was a leader of. And I was really bent on multiplying our small group, which means that I needed another leader. I asked every single one of our small group members, hey, would you consider being the next person to lead a small group? And every single one of our members said, no, not interested in that. So I was bummed. I was, seeing my vision slip through my fingers. I really was thinking this was going to be our next thing. And then I remembered Matthew chapter 9. Leadership recruitment actually initiates with prayer, where we pray to the Lord of the harvest for more leaders. That's the first starting point. So I said, okay, I messed that one up because I talked to the folks first, and I actually needed to talk to the Lord of the harvest first. I went back to God and I started praying. God, would you bring about the next ready leader for our small group? And after a season of praying and asking the Lord of the harvest for more leaders, I actually had 2 of the people who said no come to me at their own initiative and say, hey, it changed my mind. I'd like to say yes. Don't make the same mistake I did. Start with prayer. Ask God for more leaders. So you've asked God. And now you're going to go, you've got somebody in mind, you've got a specific role in mind. You're actually going to set a specific time to get together with them. And you're going to meet with them to invite them into this specific leadership role. It's not a generic invitation. Hey, would you like to be a leader someday in the future, 50 years from now? It's, I've got a role. And I've got a reason that I'm connecting with you right now. And I want to see if you might bring those 2 things together by considering entering into a leadership journey within this role. So make sure that you address the concern, the top concern that they have, the number one thing they're thinking on their brain. I'm not a leader, right? I'm not a leader. That's what they're thinking about, is I'm not a leader. So it's your job then, as you give them the invitation, to communicate what it is that you see in them. Why are you sitting across from the Zoom link, making an invitation to them specifically? What unique skills, abilities, talents, characteristics did they possess? At our church, at our organization, we look for people who, and then list that out and say, I see that in you. And therefore, I'd like to invite you to consider a specific role within our church, a leadership role. And let me describe the role to you. And then you give them the actual ask. Would you commit to praying about that for the next 1 or 2 weeks? Don't ask for an answer when you actually get together with them. Give them the gift of a spiritual growth opportunity. A spiritual growth opportunity by leaning into God and saying, hey, is this what you have for me next? So you're actually, the worst case scenario is they say no to you. But look at the gift that you've given them. You've given them the opportunity to reflect on what might be their next step, on the areas where they may be prompted to grow, on the areas where they might reconsider themselves as a kingdom builder and have that God has endowed within them to offer. See, these are sacred moments. When we extend the invitation, it's an opportunity to guide somebody spiritually, to impress upon them the importance that they have in the kingdom building effort. Even if they say no, that reflection period serves them so well. So I'm going to ask you, who are 3 people that you might personally invite to bring from the sheep pens and to embark on a leadership journey? What are 3 names that come to mind? We start to get specific about folks that embody the characteristics that we're looking for and what makes us uniquely different. And we've got a specific role, and we combine those 2 things together, and that's when we have a specific invitation that we can give. See how all of this talk is culture? The questions, what are we going to teach? When are we going to meet to do leadership development? How long is that meeting going to happen? All of those are great questions, but they're not the first questions. The first questions are all about culture, because if we can create the fertile soil of leadership culture, then when we plant the leadership development within that culture, we'll actually see leaders bloom. So when we get to this leadership development piece, the actual impartation of skills, let's talk for a moment about that. Because at the end of the day, if we were to talk together about what are the skills that leaders need, we could probably fill not only one whiteboard, but an abundance of whiteboards, right? They need the ability to cast vision. They need the skill to allocate resources to the critical growth path. They need to be able to have difficult conversations. They need to be able to navigate change. There are so many skills that leaders need. Where do we start? What's the most important skill that person needs? Well, I've seen so many teams start their leadership development strategy with that very question. What is the first thing we need to teach our leaders? And then I see those teams debate that for the next 3 years because it's a very complex possibility. Here's what's right from what I can tell. The right place to start is whatever the individual leader needs in order to accomplish the next challenge in their role. See, leadership development is best when it is individualized to the specific skills that a leader needs for their unique role. So if I have a leader who is needing to have they don't have enough people on their team, then perhaps they need the skill of casting vision, and that's the next thing for them. Maybe I've got a leader that has a team that isn't getting along with one another well, and we need skills of having difficult conversations for that leader. See, all of these things are needed in order to get leadership done. But what is the right first starting spot? It's tailor-made, it's individualized to specific leaders. There's no cookie cutter way to go about going about serving our leaders. It's important for us to individualize leadership development to skills for the specific leadership challenge that our leaders are facing. Now remember, we're assuming already that they're engaged in the discipleship process of our church. So when you think about this spiritual growth part of it, let discipleship be discipleship. We're talking here about leadership skill. So I work for, as I mentioned, the Global Leadership Network. We've identified 33 leadership competencies. And you actually can get arrange content for your leaders based on whatever of the 33 competencies that would fit their specific leadership challenge best. Is it an exhaustive list? Nope, not by any means. Leadership is a really robust topic, but these are 33 possibilities. So that can be found at globalleadership.org. And you can actually sift through resources by specific skill and align your leaders with the individualized leadership development that they're needing. When you do that, so often we lean into content when we think about leadership development. What we have found to be of equal importance is conversation and opportunity to actually lead, opportunity to apply the content and put skills in action. So we want to mix a balance here of content, conversation, and skills in action all together. So actually, when we look at, I convene a group of folks who lead and learn together on a monthly basis, and we have a little rule of thumb that we will only view content to the same amount of time that we have opportunity to talk about it together, sharpen each other, and aim to apply it. So we want to, when you think about framing your leadership development, have opportunity for conversation between leaders together as they skill one another up. So these are 5 ways that you can fuel leadership culture. Define who is a leader, identify leadership potential. So we're looking for folks within your sheep pens that really embody who you are as a church, who you are as an organization. You see some horsepower that's there. So you're going to identify that, and you're going to agree together on what are those characteristics? What are those identifiers? That way, when your entire team is looking for leaders, you're actually inviting people to support, embody, and uplift the organizational DNA that you're trying to curate. So you've got a definition of who is a leader, identify leadership potential. You're clarifying your leadership roles. So you're saying, hey, this is the specific responsibility that I am inviting you into. Then you're going to select these folks with personal invitations. And these are holy moments. These are moments when you're inviting them to hear from the heart of God. Is this what God has for them? Quite frankly, I don't celebrate the number of yeses that I get when I measure this one. I celebrate the number of invitations that were made, because every invitation is an opportunity to help somebody to grow spiritually. And then finally, I'm going to look at individualizing leadership development to skills needed for the role. What's the leadership challenge? It's that the skill that individual needs is the thing to focus on next. All right, so those are the ways to go about fueling leadership culture. There are 5 ways that you can crush, kill, beat up your leadership culture and stomp it out. So if you're interested in killing your leadership culture, by all means, grab one, or better yet, all 5 of these and deploy them in tandem. The number 1 way to kill leadership culture is write a curriculum and lecture. So often we see leadership development tracks be classes, and you come to these classes, and on the other side, you know what you have? You have a student. You don't have a leader. Leaders need opportunities to deploy skills. Leaders need opportunities to actually go about leading. So how do you kill leadership culture? Number 1, write a curriculum and lecture. Instead, look for some specific content that's just right for your leaders, and then have a conversation about that as they go about actually deploying it. Another way to kill leadership culture is to centralize leadership development. To say, okay, this person here in our organization, they're going to take care of leadership development. They're going to be the leadership development wizard that just kind of goes around and waves a magic wand for all of the ministries or all of the departments in the organization, and poof, all of a sudden everybody has leaders. If you rely on one person or one centralized way to go about leadership development, then we're actually missing a whole lot of opportunity. Leadership development is what every single ministry does within the church. It's what every department does within the organization. You can't delegate it out to another team. Every team goes about living out and setting the leadership culture together so that they are drawing up leaders, and you actually have more folks that are drawing people from the sheep pens. Third way, how to kill leadership culture: have nothing for new leaders to lead. If you have hey, someday you're going to be a leader. You're my pet apprentice, and I'm just, I'm gonna groom you. I'm gonna take care of you. I'm gonna look after you. But the one thing I'm not gonna do is actually release you. So we need actually something for new leaders to lead. That's critical. So that's back to that clarifying of the role. What is it that the role that you've got for folks? So have a specific thing for them to go about leading. If you've got leaders in your organization who have nothing to lead, there is something that they will go about doing: leaving your organization. Okay, so you want those folks to stay, give them something to lead. All right, fourth way to kill leadership culture is to cancel leadership development when things get busy. We see this happen so often, right? The tyranny of the urgent invades, and then what do? I just don't have time to go about leadership development right now. Do you have any idea? Have you seen my to-do list? It is so long. There's no way I have time to do leadership development. I'll get to it next month. I'll get to it next quarter. Exceptional leaders all have something in common. They all prioritize leadership development, whether it's for themselves or for the organizations that they lead. They do not cancel leadership development. They persist and plow through it, even when the tyranny of the urgent is raining down upon them. Even when they're in these stretch moments, they still go after leadership development. Fifth way to kill leadership culture: excuse the senior leaders. Top of the org chart, y'all are good enough. Y'all are good to go. You don't need to show up or do anything when it comes to leadership development. You get a pass because, well, you're our executive leader, so you must have it all figured out. That will kill leadership culture. The people at the top of your organization are the folks that need to model leadership learning. They need to be overly verbal about the things that they're learning in leadership, about the ways that they're growing as leaders. It's really important because they have disproportionate influence in setting the tone of the leadership culture. So those are 5 ways to kill leadership culture. Write a curriculum and lecture. Centralize leadership development. Have nothing for new leaders to lead. Cancel leadership development when things get busy, and excuse senior leaders. Now, it could be that you we're looking for maybe some of these notes along the way, those 5 things to build leadership culture and 5 things to kill. I'm going to ask if Desiree would drop that one more time into the chat. There's actually a notes page that you can click on and download. And work through those 5 questions with your team as you look about building leadership culture within your organization. So in the last few moments here together, we would love to open it up for some Q&A, that there may be some specific questions that you have, and we'd love to invite you to drop those into the chat that we might be able to field those. Desiree may have some that she's even curated and will drop in, but if there are questions that you've got, would you go ahead and drop those into the chat? And there's the notes page if that would be of service to you. And we will turn the balance of our time over to you to decide what we do with. What happens when one of your people wants to raise up, let's see, what happens when one of your people you want to raise up already has a bunch on their plate, all good things and all spiritually beneficial things? Brilliant question. Often it is the folks that have the most aptitude for leadership that are already having full plates. Here's how I would answer that, is that if you have a specific leadership role in mind for someone and there's a potential fit there, I would emphasize that invitation moment and allow their discernment and their calling to kind of filter out what is it that needs to get dropped from their life, what is it needs to get that they may need to bring into their life. So instead of saying their no for them, think very specifically about the role that you have for them and think very specifically about why they're a good fit, and then deliver that invitation and invite them to ask God what his leading in their life is. So you don't have to have the yes or no. All you do is make the invitation and then allow God to kind of tip their heart on what they need to release and not. Let's see, how do I start the conversation of the second rail of leadership when it's combined into discipleship prior? This is a really, really common question as I work with churches that are used to seeing leadership embedded into the discipleship process. And what I have found is that as you're having that conversation, it's helpful to lean into, we're talking about the organizational role here. We're not abandoning discipleship. We're actually prerequisiting. Is that even a word? I don't know. But we're saying you're prerequisite for being a leader. In other words, before we can even consider you as a leader, it's critical that you are in the discipleship process, that you are exhibiting spiritual growth. We're not even going to talk to you about adding leadership skill until we have that going. So team that's really in love with the discipleship aspect, really gifted at that, I need you to continue to major on that. We've got to have it. Now, what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to create a team that actually imparts leadership skill. And in fact, we do this in other spots in the church as well, right? I guarantee that you do not want me playing your guitar on your worship team. That would be a train wreck. Why? Because I have no skill for guitar playing whatsoever. That's a skill though, right? There are skills that we deploy within the church already. Why not add leadership to that as well? So we've got the discipleship piece. We actually want to have a conversation now about the skills component of leadership as well. Let's jump into, in this time of crisis, what do you think are measures that should be taken to assure that leadership culture is well sustained? Brilliant question. And there are multiple crises that we're facing right now. And this is, when I think about this, I think about how important it is to make sure that our leaders are staying grounded in what we value. So the answer to that is from a spiritual component, and the answer for that is also from an organizational component. So this is really important where leaders are in uncertain times right now, where we can't forecast the future quite as far as we were able to in the past. We need to stick to what it is that we know. Hey, regardless of what we're going to look like as an organization, it's critical that we continue to live out our values. So in this time of crisis, measures that I would take are revisiting the values within the organization, revisiting those things that you maybe surface on your identifiers list so that you can know who do you draw from the sheet pens. I'm going to revisit those, and I'm going to revisit them maybe in larger gatherings, you know, where I've got a lot of people on a Zoom call, but maybe in smaller one-on-one or one-on-three type gatherings. I'm going to curate conversation about how important it is, regardless of when we're leading or what challenge we're leading through, for us to maintain who we are as an organization and who we are as followers of Christ. Let's see. How do you make the recruiting process when you have an abundance, when you have a whole bunch of leadership needs? How do you make the recruiting process a sacred moment and go through that process together? So right now you may have a large amount of leadership needs. I might share, if you've got kind of a I think let's see, how would I answer this? I would answer this by, I almost said, continue to throw out an announcement to the larger constituency, but that actually I still think circumvents that selection process. So what I would do is, if you're needing if you're needing lots more leaders, you might make that known to the organization simply because it'll surface people that you don't have relationship with. But this is where the team becomes really important. So I'm going to share a little picture here with you. If I am the only person that is looking for leaders, then the number of leaders that I'm actually able to gather is limited to my sphere of influence. If I'm actually needing an abundance of leaders, I'm going to need more eyes that are out there looking into the sheet pens to draw people into leadership roles. And so I'm going to be tasking my entire leadership team to go out and make these spiritual invitations into the leadership, into a leadership journey. If I'm the only one, it's going to be really limited. So I'm going to need multiple people out there having these sacred moments. Quite frankly, I think in this specific environment, these sacred moments are what people are hungry for, right? They're looking for that connection opportunity. So I would, it'll take maybe more time because you're actually making more invitations to populate the leadership roles that are needed. But I think there's no easy way to go about. You can't microwave the solution. It's got to be a slow cooker. So just add the number of people that are making the invitations is how I would go about solving that. Let's see. Young leader in the church, how do you influence those who are higher up who may be lacking in some areas of developing a leadership culture? Fantastic question. The way that I would do this is I would perhaps do it in a way that postures yourself as a learner, going to the people that are in the higher areas, I think, of the organization. Is that, yeah, higher up. Go to those folks and ask them a few questions. Hey, can you tell me what's the process that we identify new leaders within our organization? What does it mean to be a leader within our organization? I might take even these 5 questions that we've talked about to those senior leaders and ask them with a sincere learning posture. If you ask them in a way that you're, hey, I'm trying to get a message across to you that you're not doing something right, those senior leaders will detect that right quick. But if you ask it from a posture, they're actually, write the generous story. There may be answers to these questions that your senior leaders have, and you just don't know what the answers are. And maybe you could add some fuel to the fire that is their answers. So go and add, what's the process of finding leaders? How do we tap people? What's a leadership role look like in our organization? If these questions have answers by your senior leadership, they just may need some help going about doing it. So go into it and honor your senior leaders by being a learner, but also If they don't have answers, then perhaps you can volunteer and offer, hey, I have a passion around this. Would you mind if I made some contributions to figuring this out? Would that be okay? And if you're really serious about it, are you willing to do that as your calling, on your own time? Assure your supervisor, hey, I'm not gonna take this away from time of the responsibilities that I have. I'm willing to add to this because I believe so strongly in it. Really great question. How do you pull a leader out of a position that they're not suited for? This is so hard, especially in a church. I couldn't agree with you more. The hardest things that I've had to do are not release staff to a different future, but to release volunteer leaders to a different future. That's a very hard conversation. And it is, so I completely agree with you. So it's critical that we trace it back to the responsibilities that the leader has. What I'm needing from you, the role that I invited you to, was to look after producing or look after creating a team that did this. I haven't seen that happen. Relate it to the outcomes or to the values of your organization. So if they're violating values within your organization that you're holding your leaders to, then that becomes the conversation. But it's important to have an objective, substantive conversation that's either around pay-to-play values or around the outcomes that are needed from the chair that the leader sits in. So, for example, if I've talked to them and coached them abundantly to try and bring about the outcomes that we need from their role, the last conversation I'm going to have with them is this. What I need from the chair you occupy is this. I'm not going to have a conversation with you anymore about how to get that. What I need you to be aware of is that's what I need from your chair. Now it depersonalizes it a little bit, but the person realizes that this is the outcome that's needed. And if I'm not able to go about stepping into and living out that responsibility, then the organization is going to need somebody else in this chair. So look for values violations and link it to the initial ask that you made. What's the responsibility that you have invited somebody into? Is there an assessment or questions that you have used to determine the greatest need? Okay, so this is the greatest need within, say there might be a skill issue that is an immediate need, but a character or spiritual issue that's a greater need. So the spiritual issues we want to continue to turn to our discipleship program to address, whatever that discipleship pathway is. So if somebody comes to a point in their life where perhaps they need to revisit and being anchored in those spiritual pieces, you may actually invite them to take a sabbatical from their role in order to shore up their spiritual growth. Hey, and I recall this is one of the earliest lessons that I learned as a leader, right? Because I made it all about doing. And I'm not a human doing, I'm a human being. And so I actually had to step away from some of my leadership responsibilities to remember that I was a human being, that I might actually bring the doing part into it more appropriately. So it could be that you have folks take a season off for them to get anchored. I want to give you the gift of time. So I'm going to have your leadership responsibilities elsewhere. And would you take that time and immerse yourself into spiritual disciplines, immerse yourself into the discipleship pathway within our setting. So I want to do a couple of, I was going to throw up my my contact info. If you want to continue this conversation, I'll stick around for a little bit longer, but I also want to share with you, how do I do, let's see, hit share screen. I'll give you my email if that's a helpful thing to you. And you can pop me an email if that would be helpful with some additional questions. Feel free to do that, dave.bushnell@globalleadership.org, if we can be of service to you. And we also want to, because you're investing in yourself, we want to acknowledge that, reward that, affirm that. because you're part of the Thrive Summit, we'd like to offer you a special rate to attend the Global Leadership Summit in August 6th and 7th. So you can use that priority code 20THRIVE, and you'll actually hear more about that later as we go through the Thrive Conference. I mentioned the 33 competencies earlier. You can find those at globalleadership.org. Click the word grow, and that actually will list the 33 competencies there within, so that you can find the specific skills that you're to help individualize leadership development for your team. Hey, this is a joy to be at the Thrive Summit with you. Thank you for investing your time, your energy to growing as a leader on behalf of the people that you lead. Thank you for that. It's a huge gift to those people. Continue to be sharp, continue to grow, and the people around you will grow. So I'll stick around here if there's a little bit more questions, but please feel free to tap out. Thanks so much for being with us. I love that, Josh. A bit of advice that I was given by someone is to give those that you're pouring into and leading some ownership in your area. So this is making room in the chariot, if you will. If I'm a chariot driver, I'm gonna scooch over a little, invite somebody else to take one of the reins and learn alongside me and lead alongside me. Way to go, Josh. I love that. Staffing question on leading up. How do you expedite the change management curve when a new executive leader joins an organization? So how do you expedite the change management curve when a new executive leader joins the organization? So you've got a new leader and they're looking to make change within the organization, and they're trying to make it happen a little bit faster. I would say that change happens at the speed of trust. And so the focus of that new executive leader would be to lean heavily into building trust with those folks that they are leading. So if they can speed that trust up, then they'll be able to speed the rate of change up a little bit faster. Any other questions that, and at this point, we'd be happy to even hear those even through the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, we can do that now that we're past that 60 minute slot. How do you make significant moves toward developing a leadership culture if it's not the heart of the senior pastor? I'm a consultant who helps church staff, so I'm not talking about a specific leader. Great. So how do you, so at the end of the day, so a leadership culture is really, you don't want to centralize it, but it's also really helped when there is somebody who is empowered to hold the organization accountable to leadership development. So leadership, this isn't centralizing it, right? Because leadership development is still going to happen across all the teams, but there may be a need to actually tap somebody that works with and holds all of those teams accountable to bringing about leadership development. So the question might be posed to the senior leader, hey, is this an important thing within our organization to see capacity building by adding leaders? If yes, you don't have to be the one that does that. In fact, you can say, yep, that's important. We need to do it. I'm going to empower this individual to hold our organization accountable to making that happen. So that's one potential solution. We probably should recognize that if a senior leader simply is not about leadership development, the law of the lid does come in here. So we can lead up to that individual, show them this is how we actually both stimulate growth and retain growth, because we're adding capacity when we're adding leaders. But we might actually help them to see, hey, this isn't yet another thing for you to do. it's okay if you empower and tap somebody else to go about holding folks accountable. What's the best way to personalize leadership development when you have 400 to 500 Bible fellowship leaders without it being a lecture type and annual training? We do a lot of small things year round. A great question. So some of this goes back to the role. So we've got Bible fellowship leaders. So to clarify the specific role that they have, that's a enormous task, right? If you're a Bible fellowship leader. So how do I clarify it into some irreducible minimums and then even kind of bring some skill along those? The other thing that comes to mind there is the Jethro principle in Exodus 18, where it may need a higher level of touch, where you kind of go into the thousands, hundreds, 50s, and 10s. And the way to actually skill up leaders with individualizing their specific needs is to say, hey, here's a coach or a leader of leaders that is going to help you know what is your leadership challenge and what's the skill that you need to face that leadership challenge. I can do that better if I offer them a smaller span of care. So all of the answer to your question there, I think, is Exodus 18, smaller spans of care to be able to more personalize the leadership development that's needed for the folks that you're looking at. Okay, so we're finding a challenge, finding the 33 competencies. So I'll try and do a little multitasking and bring that up while I'm doing that. So I've got, so I'll just do a screen share and show you. I've typed in globalleadership.org. And then if I go over here to grow, on the left side, it says lead yourself, lead others, lead organizations. Within each one of those areas of leadership are 11 competencies. So if I click lead others, for example, then that's going to load up a series of articles, podcasts, videos, etc. And so here's the leading others tab. And then under that, I've got 11 competencies right here. So collaboration, communication, conflict management, diversity, influence, leadership development, and so on. So that's how I get there. So I did, just to review that, I did globalleadership.org. And then what I did was I hovered over grow and I chose one of these three areas: lead yourself, lead others, or lead organizations. So if I do lead organizations, then it'll load up the 11 competencies within leading organizations. And then I can sort the content by, do I want articles, podcasts, videos, or GLS premium content? So that's how I get to those 33 competencies. Tips or advice on getting people excited for either transitioning leadership and or group multiplication. Josh, two things I would say about that. Vision, 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 and move with the movers. Vision, 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 and move with the movers. So as somebody who has done exactly what you're talking about there, multiplying, especially within a small group context, there are going to be leaders who are highly receptive to the multiplication vision, and there's going to be leaders who are highly receptive to the holy huddle. Spend your time, spend your energy, and spend your capital on those that have the vision for multiplication. You're not going to ignore or disqualify the holy huddle. That's fine. You know, you're still here. You're doing your thing. That's great. You're not who I'm going to go out to coffee with. You're not going to be the one that I really am seeing the potential to build the vision for the ministry on. So I would really cast that vision over and over and over. Like, you're going to be sick of it. You're just going to want to throw up. It's not. Then you have started to permeate the audience. So cast the vision for multiplication and move with the movers. The parable of the sower is so rich for that, as an answer to that question. Look for those seeds that are really multiplying. But I hear you. It's not an easy thing. The language matters when it comes to multiplication. Your leaders will say split, divide. You're a meanie, right? But you want to use words like launch, multiply, new, increase touch points, that kind of thing. You may also go about doing it from a standpoint of, rather than multiplying where there's an existing group of 10 and you always move it into 5 and 5, you may say, hey, this leader right here, I'm going to have you go start a new group. It's least impactful to those that may have a problem with the multiplication vision, where you tap somebody that does and they go launch something that's brand new. So try and mitigate the fear of change that folks have by looking for people who do fit that vision and are ready to do something new. And that's where you spend a disproportionate amount of your energy as the leader. Same for transitioning leadership. Should I be pushing for a transitioned leader's vision, even if the vision may be different from my own, or maybe push them toward a vision so that I can help get behind them and reinforce that? When you say transitioning leadership, so if you're looking for, essentially, you need to move somebody to their preferable future is what I'm assuming that you're talking about. Should I be pushing for a transitioned leader's vision? Maybe give me a little more context. From me and my wife, leadership to, yeah, you could essentially, you may be, I hope I'm hearing this right, but the existing leader may hand the group to somebody that's in the group, and the existing leader goes to start a new group. And if I'm missing that entirely, Josh, feel free to pop me an email so that I can answer that correctly. Yeah, you're looking now and raise up another couple. So yeah, you either hand them the group or send them, or if you've painted the picture to the group ahead of time, it could be that the group is receptive to actually doing some group members are gonna seed new groups. I could go on a whole nother breakout around small group life cycles. It's one of my favorite topics. And I do say life cycles because they're a living organism. There is a time for a small group to be laid to rest. That's an okay thing. But we don't like to do that within the church world because it's unkind and ungracious. But actually, when we prune, there's some scripture about actual more growth that comes out of that. Hey, it's been an absolute ball with y'all. Do we have been an absolute ball to be with you? I'm noticing that the chat is starting to slow down, so maybe we've hit the questions that you had. Again, feel free to reach out as additional questions and such may hit you. I'll drop my email into the chat for y'all. And feel free to pop me an email if you have additional questions as you work with your teams answering these things. But it's been a treat to be with you. Have an awesome Thrive Summit. I know that God has incredible things in store for us over the next couple days. So prepare to get your mind blown and your heart enlarged. So take care, y'all. Thanks a bunch for the time together.